Good evening. So welcome to episode 15 of Teh Tarik with Walid. So today I'm very delighted to have Ambassador Muhammad Alami Musa on, and I will introduce him in a while. So if you can hear me, please comment in the comment section, and if you have any questions as well, please comment there while we wait for people to stream in. And before I accept Ambassador Alami's request, I just wanted to say that this episode was supposed to be done about 40 plus days ago, but unfortunately my dad passed away, and I just wanted to say that my family and I have been very touched by the amount of love and warmth that we have received, the messages, the messages, the PMs, the DMs, the visits, multiple visits from some people. So we truly appreciate all of that, and I will never forget the goodwill that we have received from every single one who have either message or spared a thought for us, spared a prayer for us. So today we will have Ambassador Muhammad Alami Musa. So he was one of those. I actually invited him right after the IPS forum. He was on the panel on identities and cohesion, and you know, the forum where the concept of Chinese privilege was essentially trashed. And right after the forum, I invited him, Professor Daniel Goh, and Mei-Lin Fung to come on. So we've done one with Mei-Lin, and today hopefully is the second one with Ambassador Alami. So let me just introduce him briefly. So Ambassador Alami is currently the non-resident ambassador of Singapore to Algeria. He is also the head of studies in interreligious relations in plural societies program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at NTU. Well, that's a mouthful. So it's called the SRP program at RSIS at NTU. And he was also formerly the president of MUIS. He's still the non-executive president of MUIS. Back then he had, so now I may be wrong, but I assume it's just a director come advisory position, whereas previously it was an executive position. And some time ago he was also the chairman of the Association of Muslim Professionals. Therefore he is somebody, as far as the Muslim community goes, it's difficult to think of somebody who is more prominent than Ambassador Alam. I was thinking just now, who could I say is more prominent than him? Non-politicians who are more prominent than Ambassador Alami. I'm thinking probably Professor Hussein Muttalib and maybe Mr. Puat Mata. Anyway, so he's right up there. Okay, so without further ado, so that's the setup. Let me accept his request, and hopefully, yesterday we had some trouble doing this. Hopefully this time there won't be any technical issues. Hi, sir, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm
Hello,
good, I'm good.
Yeah,
yes, you can hear me?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
And you can see me also, eh? Okay.
Yes, I can see you as well. Okay, so thank you. First of all, so I need to apologize in advance for getting you on Instagram. Instagram is a cesspool, you know. It's like Hotel California. You only check in, you don't check out. So secondly, I wanted the audience to know first. So the day that my dad passed away, Ambassador Alami gave me a call, and he spoke to me for about 5 to 10 minutes, and I really appreciated that. You know, when you're down and out, you really remember the people who spared a thought for you. So I really appreciate it, and that's the relationship that I have with Ambassador Alami. So again, I apologize in advance if today some of the issues today may get a little bit contentious, but it's nothing personal because I have a good relationship with him. It's really about the issues which go beyond me or him or our relationship. All right. So the first question I have for you, Ambassador, is about that I say fateful IPS forum where Professor Daniel Goh said that a lot of examples of Chinese privilege have already been brought up in the academic literature, and he then said other terms such as, and I'm quoting, racial prejudice, racial stereotyping, racial discrimination, institutional racism, structural racism have actually been used, and they are better to describe whatever is going on in Singapore. And you went after Daniel and you said that we cannot generalize Chinese privilege. We cannot say we are a racist country or racism exists. After you said that you largely agree with Daniel Goh. So my first question to you is, what do you think is privilege? What do you think is racism? And what are the instances that we see in Singapore?
Yeah. Thank you, Walid. Thank you for the invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, good. Yeah. Now, before I begin, let me preamble the discussion tonight with 3 points. One is, I see this as a conversation, like what Walid said. No, this is not a contest. It is not a dialogue whereby it's you versus me or I versus you. No, it's kind of face off. No, certainly not a monologue. I'm not here to lecture and to convert you. I see this as a conversation. I like to learn as much as possible from Walid and from all of you. To be exact, a kind of colloquy, a structured and organized conversation. Secondly, which I think is very important, when we discuss social phenomenon, we must never generalize from the particular. Okay, so for example, I illustrate. There is a lack of women on the boards of companies now. So there's a committee to increase women representation. But the fact that the lack of women directors on company boards does not mean that we can generalize that there is discrimination against women in Singapore. That's my point. Okay?
But we cannot discount the possibility as well, right?
Yeah, certainly there exist, there are pockets here and there, but generally as a country, I don't think as a country we discriminate against our women folk. Then third point that I like to emphasize is that we need to understand the meaning of words and terms, and go to the genesis of it or the origin of it, the etymology of it. So example again, the word tolerance, I mean, we always use tolerance, we think it's a good word, actually it's a bad word. It emerges during medieval toxicology and pharmacology, which means the amount of poison a body can absorb until the body succumbs to death. So which means that if Walid has tolerance to me, I'm poison to him, but and so on. So we have to be careful on the use of words. So, and Chinese privilege is a big word, certainly a big word. And I see the discussion on Chinese privilege in Singapore as a kind of mirror image with a study or discourse of white privilege in America, in the US. And of course, the discussion about white privilege has happened or has taken place for quite a number of decades, in the US. Emerged probably during the civil rights movement. So, but it was done very quietly until the Black Lives Movement came about. Then it was thrust into social media, and this whole idea of white privilege became a kind of globalized. But it is contested. Even in the US, the idea of white privilege is contested. The whites say, no, we are not like that, And some whites say, yeah, no, we are. So I think there is a kind of contestation there. So I think when it comes to ours, and of course, the idea went over to many places, including Singapore. And in fact, this discourse has just started. I know, Walid, you did a paper on this with Humaira, is it? Yeah?
Yes, Humaira, yeah. Dr.
But what I understand, in fact, Kianun was the first one to do it specifically and study in 2018, I think. But be careful, we cannot put everything in the basket of Chinese privilege, because I even heard that a book by Lily Zubaida Rahim on Malay dilemma in 1999 is also clustered or categorized as part of Chinese privilege study. So I thought, hey, we are going a bit overboard with this whole idea of Chinese privilege. So what I am saying is that I want everybody to exercise caution. Exercise caution on this whole idea of Chinese privilege, because the term Chinese privilege to me is very connected to racism, you know. And racism is another big word. We have to be very careful in the use of the word racism, because it is the existence of very hardened cultural cleavage, you know, or gulf, you know, between the dominant culture and the subordinate culture. And here, dominant culture can be, of course, is a majority culture, subordinate culture, and minority culture. And that leads for the dominant culture to look down, to ostracize, to alienate, and to dehumanize the subordinate. And in sociological terms, subordinate means the minorities. So I think, and of course, racism is an area of study, a field of really study. You know, a lot of assumptions, you know, building on personality linked with hereditary, your specific type, you know, skin color and things like that. And so, in the first place, I question, and this is also contested, whether the condition for the existence of Chinese privilege exists. Okay, whether in the first place, is there racism? Is racism prevalent in our society? And that is an important condition, you know, condition.
Okay, so you are saying that, if I get your stance correctly, you think Chinese privilege doesn't exist and racism is not prevalent, right?
I think racism, of course, there are individuals who are racist, there are groups, you know, who are racist,
Right.
but
Not
I think
prevalent.
as a country and as a society, I don't think racism is prevalent, because if you look at the definition of prevalent, it is something deep, something severe, something intense, you know. And
Sure.
I can't connect this idea with concrete evidence or evidence-based, you know,
Sure.
because
All right. All right.
yeah,
Maybe
yes,
we can explore that a little. Sorry, sir. Yeah, I think it's the
okay,
camera. Yeah, he wasn't pointing at
yeah,
you. So
yeah,
I have a few responses first before we get to the discussion. Firstly, I
yeah,
think I'm not sure whether you or I should be the arbiters on whether discrimination against females exist. I think we should let the women decide that and judge whether there indeed is discrimination. I don't think it's our place to discuss that. Secondly, it's not Kian Won who started it. Sangeeta Tanapal, I think circa 2013, 2014, Alfian
yeah.
Saad, Haida Saharuddin
I know,
wrote.
but I'm not sure whether the term Chinese privilege was used and was interrogated and investigated.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it was used, but maybe you are saying that it's not interrogated or investigated enough. Okay,
yeah,
so let's explore that. So maybe I'll give you an example, and then you tell me what an instance, what could be the appropriate word or phrase to describe it. SM
yeah.
Tharman not being able to be prime minister because he's not Chinese. Is that privilege? What is that?
You see, SM Tharman is part of the elite, and in sociological term, the elite is part of the dominant culture. So you cannot be saying that a person of dominant culture is a victim of Chinese privilege, you know,
Wait,
or
why
victim
not?
of
Why not? When the reason for him not being prime minister
yeah.
is because of his race, why can't we say he's a victim of privilege? Or maybe we don't use the word victim, right? Because that's a difficult one. But why can't we say that the fact that he is not able to be prime minister and DPM Heng is the next in line, that shows that DPM Heng, rightly or wrongly, is the beneficiary of Chinese privilege. Would you not say that?
It is hard to say, you know, Walid. I mean, it's easy to say, but I think we need to be careful, because there are many other factors and many other considerations. You see, Chinese privilege, you can link things to Chinese privilege if it is something which is prevalent, you know, that this is entrenched, is rooted in society. But I think at what I see today now, I don't think we are at that level or that stage, So I'm sure there are other factors about DPM Tharman's, episode or issue. The most that people can say that this could be just discrimination. Okay, this could just be discrimination. Yeah, but to say, oh, this is part of the Chinese privilege, I have difficulty to
But
accept that because
what? Sorry,
the
yeah,
term Walid,
yeah,
the
yeah, carry
term
on, carry on.
Chinese
Yeah,
privilege is also a contested term, because I tested this with a good friend of mine. He's a very senior religious leader, but he's from Nantah, Chinese educated. So
sure.
I told him about Chinese privilege. Now you guys, you are, and he vehemently opposed me. He said, the Chinese educated in Singapore felt that the wave or the wind is against them, the headwind.
Sure. And that
And
is true.
secondly, I traveled in a taxi with an uncle, Chinese. And he said, look, no, I have to struggle so hard in Singapore. Doesn't mean I'm Chinese. I can just, there are things given to me from the sky, And then,
Yeah.
you go to food center. I mean, people say that there are, there are social divides, which
Right. So
the
let's explore.
the victims or the
Right.
receiving ends are also Chinese. So you
Right.
cannot
So
say Chinese
I
privilege, Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Okay, so maybe
But
an
yes,
elucidation of the terms is needed, maybe. So,
yeah.
Chinese privilege doesn't equal racism. Nobody I know has defined it as that. It may include, it may not include racism. So, how Humaira and I defined Chinese privilege is using Sangeeta, which is using Alfian and Haider, and they built on the concept of white privilege, which is unearned advantages that are conferred upon you.
Yeah.
Now, so when we say Chinese privilege, it doesn't mean all Chinese, under all circumstances, are equally privileged over every single minority. Nobody says that. But so when people say the Chinese educated have been victims, and I agree, but that doesn't mean that compared to the Malay educated, a Chinese educated doesn't have certain privileges. Okay, let me ask you, Ambassador, right? Have you ever met anyone who thinks a Chinese who is poor because of his race? Because of his race, not in spite of his race. Have you ever met anyone who thinks that?
Poor because of race. I think nobody
Because
is.
of his race. Nobody. Right. But have you ever met people who think a Malay is poor because of his race? That's privilege.
I
That's
haven't
privilege.
come across that. I always tell
You
my
you
Malay.
haven't come across.
No. I always tell my Malay folks, when I go to the mosque when I was President Musa, I see in
Yes.
Singapore, you need to work very hard to be poor, So I
Sure.
think it's certainly there are discrimination on race, in the employment place or in seeking jobs and opportunities. I don't deny that, I don't deny that. But
Ah,
if there is what you're saying that there is a kind of a wave or a headwind against you, because you are Malay, I cannot accept that for the moment
no.
until
It's not.
Walid, until you do what Peggy McIntosh do.
Okay.
Peggy McIntosh studied white privilege. She did a study, with
Yeah.
42 indicators, I think,
Sure.
and then after that she scaled it and she said, yes, there is white privilege in America.
Okay.
So
All
what
right.
I'm
So,
saying, Walid, I am not denying tonight that certainly, tak ada, certainly no, but you as a scholar, you need, if you want to go into this, please do a proper study.
okay.
Have your
So,
36, 40, 42 indicators,
sure. Okay.
and then you,
So I didn't do 36, but I did 5 or 6 in the paper. So there's one. SM Taman not being there may be other reasons, but the reason that was given was that he's not Chinese.
And also, you see, definition by Peggy McIntosh again, that is what white privilege or Chinese privilege is as if you are having a knapsack, a bag, an
Yeah.
individual bag,
Yes.
where
Yes.
there are unearned assets.
Yes.
It is
Exactly.
in you, but you don't realize, because of your race. And also, you don't are oblivious to the other races they are not getting it,
Right.
And that is the other analogy is that there is a kind of backwind pushing you along so you move faster, but you don't realize it that there are people facing the headwind, So, Walid, I like to be prudent in the use of this term Chinese privilege, because it's a very serious thing. If we are having that in Singapore, I think we are in very deep trouble. It's a big it is a social problem, So
Yeah, but the basis of not accepting something cannot be because we don't like the consequences, right? The basis of accepting something is whether it's true. It cannot be what are the consequences, right? So maybe I get back to that point. I can go on, but SM Tarman, this is the final time I'm gonna ask, and then I'll go on to other examples. Do you think that's an example of privilege or racism or discrimination? What is it? Because I think privilege is less offensive than racism or discrimination, because DPM Hing is not being racist. He just happens to be a beneficiary of the fact that SM Tarman is not Chinese. That's my point when I say Chinese privilege.
Okay, I go back to DPM Tarman, Walid,
SM,
you're a scholar, DPM Tarman, or SM Tarman, you are a scholar, I think I'm a trained engineer, so I'm very particular about evidence, about correspondence theory of truth, you need to connect facts and objective truth and facts and figures, and then after that you conclude whether it is true or false. I think for the case of DPM Tarman, I am not convinced that it is because I'm not convinced that what public opinion said about him is true. I am very particular, meaning that 1 million people say that, Walid, I want you to be prime minister, or maybe 3 million people, majority, right? Walid, you become prime minister. We want you to be prime minister, So does that mean that it is true? I mean, it is the correct thing that Walid must be the prime minister?
In a democracy, yes, that's how we choose our leaders.
Okay. Yeah, but my point is that when many people say Mr. Tarman should be the prime minister of Singapore, no, I think he's a wonderful man. He is a good man. He's very competent. I'm saying that, but if many people say that he ought to be the prime minister of Singapore, it doesn't mean that that is the correct, that is the best solution or position for Singapore.
But that's not the point, right? The point is he is not going to be prime minister because of his race. That's the point, right?
I mean, it so happened that he is not the Chinese lah. Yeah.
So is that privilege or disadvantage?
No. I think I like to believe unless proven otherwise, there is a blatant, discrimination against a person like SM Tarman, then I can believe it lah. At the moment, Walid, I think maybe I just state my position lah.
Okay, sure. Right. Okay, so maybe that's our first point of disagreement. So I want to explore the point I made earlier when you said you talked to the taxi driver and there are poor Chinese as well, and I completely agree. Nobody said because Chinese privilege exists there is no poor. I mean, I know that's the professor on your panel who said it, which I found was a completely unconvincing answer when he said white privilege doesn't exist because there are poor white people. But anyway, I go back to the point, because if a Malay is poor, a lot of times people think, that's because he's Malay, right? But nobody ever thinks a Chinese is poor because he or she is Chinese. In fact, people may think that, you are poor in spite of the fact that you're Chinese. Would you agree that such sentiments exist? I mean, you are a student of Professor Hussein Alatas also, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, yeah, that's why I think we will try not to be to be simplistic in discussing social phenomena, because social inequality it is a highly complex issue that needs careful and rigorous analysis.
Right.
And I think there are many factors lah. There are many multifaceted factors, because I was in AMP for 13 years, and in MOES, for 10 years, I deal a lot. And uh, the closest people into my heart are the poor and needy because of the zakat that we collect. So I believe that nobody in Singapore, no Malay in Singapore should be poor. And that was my premise. So, we studied the problem, it's multifaceted. It's not only because he or she is a Malay. And mind you, the concept of Chinese-ness, I think distract the underlying problem of inequality.
I
Because,
absolutely. Is in fact, race is not a factor.
uh,
I don't subscribe to the cultural deficit hypothesis, right? I
yeah,
don't think there are historical institutional factors. But my point is public perception. I've
yeah.
never heard somebody think that. Have you ever heard a parent say, "Oh, I don't want you to mix with those Chinese boys"?
Mm.
I've never heard that before. Have you heard a parent say, "I don't want you to mix with those Malay boys"? Isn't
Okay.
that isn't that
Oh, no.
isn't that racial
Walid,
privilege? Yeah.
anecdotal banyak, anecdotes banyak, a lot. There are not. Anecdotes banyak, a lot. But you see, this whole idea of Chinese privilege, it is deep rooted, though. It is deep rooted. It's a phenomenon which is deep rooted in history. It doesn't appear 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or since independence in 1965. The roots of white privilege, as you know, it started basically during the early years of colonization, the early years of European imperialism, and in the early years of the slave trade. So about 500-600 years of of continuous history. But what do we have in Singapore now? We are only about how many? 55 years, and before that also. No, I mean the Malays did not come here as slaves. We were
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Pribumi.
But
Who were the
but
slaves? If you are talking about
but we
slaves,
didn't
the
but we
Chinese who
didn't
came
say
to
that.
work in
We,
the ports and in the
but
construction, or Indians in the rubber estate. So
but don't you think you are actually the one who's guilty of not operationalizing the concept properly? Because nobody said Chinese privilege in Singapore is 100% similar to white privilege, right? People are saying that there
yeah,
are similarities in some areas, such
yeah,
as the unearned advantage that comes from, for instance, the perceptions about blacks. Blacks are poorer because of a cultural thing. It's the same about the perception about Malays. Even though the historical experiences are different, would you? And it's not just anecdote. So if you look at the IPS
yeah.
survey, at the IPS survey 2018, you would see that
Mm,
Malays and Indians' perceptions of discrimination is about 25, 26%.
yeah,
Whereas for the Chinese, it's much lower, right? So it's more
yeah,
than anecdotal, right? We have statistical evidence as well.
yeah. But please take note, I'm not saying that there is no discrimination.
Okay.
There are many instances, a woman wearing hijab, they say that they can't
Oh,
get a job because of,
oh,
uh,
I wasn't going there, but okay.
you know, there are many instances. Even the
All right.
Indians
Okay.
feel they are discriminated,
Yes. Correct.
in
Yes.
relation
According
to
to the IPS surveys. Yeah.
the Indian expatriates coming to Singapore. So I think I'm not denying that. I think as a country we need to manage discrimination.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, prejudices there are, stereotypes there are. Tapi let us be just careful lah tonight when we discuss.
Sure.
Okay, if you want to use Chinese or Chinese privilege, okay, let's be sure what it means, how it comes about, what are the underlying factors, and then the causes and so on and so forth, the trends. So, because what I hear so far, Walid, when people talk about Chinese privilege, it echoes of the white privilege. But don't forget, white privilege is something else, you know, in American culture and history, you know. It is entrenched, you know. It is really entrenched, and so I think you need to be careful here.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So we have two other topics. So maybe just final
Okay.
one on this one. Right? So after the IPS forum, Chinese privilege was trending on Twitter, and Twitter world wasn't too kind towards the four panelists, including yourself. And you know, a lot of people say a lot of things about Twitter. Myself also, because you know, Twitter sorts of brings about a certain nastiness that you would never say these things to people in real life, right? But you are okay saying it on Twitter. However, I think in Singapore, the discourse on Twitter is quite advanced compared to Facebook and Instagram. There's not much discourse on Instagram other than actually there's podcasts here and there. But on Twitter, the discourse is quite advanced. And my point was, a lot of people were expressing a lot of minorities were expressing their disappointment in you, especially, right? You know, because I mean, we don't expect Daniel to understand what minorities are going through, right? We don't expect Melin to understand what minorities are going through, right? But you know, to get a seat at the table is so precious. I mean, you get a seat at the table all the time, right? And people like me never get a seat at the table, right? So when you get a seat at the table, we do expect, even if you disagree with it, and you have met more minorities than I ever have, most people have ever met. And the least we expect is at least you could reflect some of these opinions in, you know, I said the same thing to Melin, right? There'll be a maximum of 3,000 people watching this. But that IPS forum, hundreds of thousands of people read about it, right? And the term Chinese privilege was completely dismissed without there being any pushback. And even what you're saying today is a bit more nuanced than what you said the other day. Yeah. So I guess that seat at the table, I guess that was the part that a lot of people were. So how would you, do you have anything to
develop the idea? If you are convinced that you're persuaded by this idea, my response is that develop it in a scholarly and academic way, you know, with a good event like what Peggy McIntosh had done, and I think it will sound better, and it will be very convincing, lah. So, and that's my point, lah. I like to see, you know, this to be translated as a concrete effort in this in Singapore's scholarship of race relations, you know. And if it is really proven, Walid, I think we have something very big to handle, you know, as a country, you know.
What evidence would you need?
Let's look at what others have done outside Singapore. Look at US, look at Europe. And
you see, the funny thing is, you said we mustn't import these concepts.
No. The methodology.
Exactly. We mustn't import these concepts. But to prove these concepts, we import the methodologies of other people. Don't you see there's at least some contradiction?
No method. Yeah, whatever method that is relevant. I mean, Peggy did 42. I remember one of it is, if you want to buy a house, you know, the agent will look who you are, no, the housing agent.
Yeah.
But I think maybe that one may not be relevant to Singapore.
Yeah, because we have the EIP. People have to look at the risk. You have to look at the risk.
So I think the framework, the methodology can be used as a reference, and then of course you can suit it, you know. You can adjust it. Okay.
Thank you for engaging. And I think one of the things perhaps we agree on is that there's a need for more scholarly work on this, and and that is a challenge I hope to accept and embrace. So let's move on. By the way, for those in the audience, and suddenly we have about 100 people, so this is one of the better attended ones, 100 people live. So for those in the audience, the questions were agreed upon last month before the events of the past 2 weeks. So we didn't change the 3 questions. Just so happened, maybe it's fortuitous or lucky for us that unlucky perhaps that the questions have assumed more relevance in the past couple of weeks. So you in the IPS panel, you said you would like more of a dialogical society, right? And yet, in a 2017 article in Straits Times, one of your op-eds, by the way, Mr. Ambassador Alami has a lot of op-eds, and I think it's worth reading them. Whether you agree is a different matter, but he has written a lot, and that is something good. I mean, we always want to promote more discourse. So, in this 2017 article, you said that there is no benefit for religious communities to pressure the government directly or indirectly through proxy in or outside parliament. So, first, let me say something about closed-door dialogues. I think there is value to it. You know, for instance, I'll just give the analogy may not fully work, but the principle is there. So, when I invite guest speakers to my class, I make sure it's closed door, because in a closed door setting, the students are more willing to ask difficult questions. The speakers are more willing to answer in a forthcoming manner. And so I see the value of closed door dialogues, and I know Muiz, yourself, you have been involved in a lot of this. They've done a lot of good work. Pergas has done a lot of good work on closed door dialogues. But don't you think closed door dialogues, I mean, the question is, I'm not saying that there's no value to it. I think there is a lot of value in it. The question is whether that's how we should continue moving forward. But before we get to that, don't you think the idea of closed door dialogue, which you have argued for in the past, or at least implicitly, don't you think that goes against the idea of a dialogical society?
Okay, thank you, Walid. Yeah, maybe I go back again to my preamble just now. I think we need to understand what words mean, what a term or what a word means. And the word dialogue is a value-loaded word. It comes from the Greek word dialogos, D-I-A-L-O-G-O-S. And two parts to the word. Dia is the ethical dimension, of the discourse. Ethics is involved, in dialogue. And logos is the part on seeking truth, Okay, so that means the discourse that you have through a dialogue is meant to seek truth, but it must be done ethically. Ethics is very important. So, and that's why, even as I talk to you, although we agree, disagree, there's still ethics between us, right?
Yep.
We obey that, we respect that, and we try to find good solution or truthful solution. Yeah, but and you are right to say that you are not against closed door dialogue, closed door, because in life there must be options lah. Not everything can be open, no. Your dialogue with your wife, must be in the bedroom, or the dialogue which I have to my siblings, regarding our father, how to handle, must be within the confines of our household, is it? So, yeah, but once you open it, Walid, the fear, the danger is there could be contestation, and in a contestation, sometimes the ethics part of the dialogue will be sacrificed, will be the victim, the ethics part of the discourse or the discussion.
What's the meaning of dialogues if there are no contestations? Why have dialogues if you are not expecting disagreements?
Yeah, because if you use the word dialogue, it means not a debate, not a winner or loser kind of thing, Walid. I mean, I'm seeing dialogue as a technical term because I do a bit of work on inter-religious dialogue. So, right. And that's how dialogue is understood. And it's also, and dialogue is also not the tyranny of the majority.
Sure.
Not the tyranny of the majority, meaning that an issue, and then you do it in a public arena. Then majority feels this way. Doesn't mean that it is true, doesn't mean
Absolutely.
that it is truth, you know.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
and that's why I think to seek truth in an ethical way, at times you need closed door dialogue. Because to do that, then you can select the people, you know, the experts or the specialists or the people with the genuine interest to come and exchange. And don't forget, dialogue is something which is a very disciplined way and organized way, you know, of exchange, a two-way exchange, you know.
Right. Right. So let's explore that. Don't you think that is precisely the problem, because there's a selection of who's involved, whereas there are a lot of people who, in this dialogical society of yours, who want to be involved in the dialogue, right? And if they are not invited, they are going to have it elsewhere anyway. I mean, they are going to have it on Twitter, where you cannot be controlling it.
Yeah.
They are going to have it. They are going to have it on Instagram. They are going to have it and
Okay.
everywhere else. They are going to have it at the coffee shops. It's not that if you don't open it up, suddenly the dialogue
Sure.
will not. Yeah. So,
So
and
you are,
doesn't that go against your dialogical society idea? Unless you are saying that what you are proposing is not really a dialogical society; it's a limited dialogical society.
can I talk about dialogical society maybe
So,
later?
so carry on. Oh, okay, carry on.
Okay.
Carry
Because
on.
I'm trying to go into a bit of the theoretical part first.
Sure.
I mean, you are talking about an issue of public interest, right? Issue
Yeah.
of public interest.
Yeah.
Now, issue of public interest, there's a certain treatment to it. Although you need closed door dialogue, but in the dialogue, the methodology is that after the dialogue, parties who are involved or individuals involved will have to come back and will have to, in a way, debrief, you know, or update, you know, their followers, what has happened, what are the issues, what are the concerns, what are my responses, you know, what are the other party punya points, you know, how they oppose us, you know. So there is a certain communication mode of communication involved, you know, in dialogue. Dialogue doesn't mean closed door. Once the dialogue is finished, you close the door. That's it, you know. No, you parties who are involved will have to go back and communicate with their followers. And in the issue of public interest, and I think this is where I can give you an example of 2014, the hijab dialogue, 25th of January. If
The
you check
100
the,
leaders.
if you check the newspapers, Straits Sunday Times and Berita Minggu on 26th of January 2014, there is a good account of what happened in that closed door dialogue. So nowadays, Walid, as you know, and it's the social media world, no such thing as difficult to, you know, have a closed door kind of discourse or discussion. Certainly, there must be information flow out of that dialogue setting. And that's what happened, you know. PM did a doorstop interview to give the gist of what happened. Community leaders, Mufti and, you know, the others were also interviewed doorstop, and then they shared with the public what transpired, you know, in that closed door dialogue. So doesn't mean closed door dialogue, 0% or zero information going out. There is, but there is a certain decorum and a certain protocol in terms of public feed in a calibrated way. So that's what I mean by closed door. Now, if you want me to go to dialogical society.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Now, my idea of dialogical society came about because I see Singapore in the next 10 years or so to be a very diverse and can be a very divided society. And we can be a polarized society if nothing is done.
Wait, so are
So
you equating diversity to polarization?
possible if there is no communication. And I use the word dialogue because the beauty of dialogue is that it is systematic, it is disciplined, it is organized, and it is in a way governed, you know, by protocol and by methodology lah. So, and And you know, in a dialogue, you don't, in the basic of dialogue is that I dialogue with Walid Jumblatt. My idea is not to win you over to me, you know. My idea is to explain my position to you, and I try to understand your position. And in fact, my job is to make you more stronger in your position, and vice versa. So can you imagine the mutual strengthening and the mutual reinforcing of dialogue? It's a very powerful tool that can be used as a social norm. And I use the word social norming, you know, of dialogue. So that kalau I ada masalah dengan Walid, if
I think
Alami can,
a lot of non-Malay speakers on the.
oh, if I see this is Malay privilege, no? You know, Walid, this is Malay privilege, no? You know, just to tell you a story,
if you accept that, right, you know that sometimes at meetings people speak Mandarin, right? That's Chinese privilege, or is that not Chinese?
Okay lah. You know, the other day I called a hotline, a call center, to ask a product, you know, many questions. And I'm scared the woman on the other side is impatient and will put down the phone. But I discerned that she's a Malay, you know, and I switched, you know, to Bahasa, you know, and I spoke to her in Malay and she entertained me, you know, so it's natural in us.
Okay, so if it's natural, and let's explore that, it's natural, and there's more Chinese around, is there an advantage to that naturalness?
Yeah, but you do it because it's natural, you know, so there's no...
Yeah, but nobody's saying Chinese privilege is sinister, right? It can be natural, but they are still conferred a privilege by virtue of the numbers, right?
Yeah, but we are not to that stage yet, you know. This is just an individual experience.
Okay.
And I'm very conscious of it. And I'm very conscious. After that, I just laughed, you know. I said, my God, I'm doing it, you know. So,
right.
And I think I shouldn't be doing that. Okay, anyway.
Anyway, dialogical society.
Dialogical society. So I think if we can have that, and I think it will be wonderful. And to be dialogical society doesn't mean between you and government, or groups and government, or organization and government, or state, but it can be between two individuals, you know. It can be between two neighbors. It can be between two colleagues or two friends. So, and it's part of our social habit, social norm. Yeah. So I think that's what I meant by a dialogical society.
Okay. So you are advocating for a limited dialogical society, right? Because you still want many people to be excluded from this dialogue, or some dialogue.
Depends on what kind of dialogue. Dialogue, there are many kinds. For example, dialogue of diplomacy. That one, we want everybody to know. When the Jewish leaders and the Muslim mufti and the Muslim leaders went to synagogue, it's a dialogue of diplomacy. So these people all come, page one, photo news, that's good, right? Or dialogue of life. You know, housewives, they talk about Ramadan, or they talk about church or wedding, or church wedding, and so on. No? So there is dialogue of life, and we want people to know. Dialogue of action, no? Young people of various race and religion come and feed the poor. The whole concept of poverty in Christianity, Islam, or that we want people to know. But when it comes to, say, a theological dialogue or a scriptural dialogue, talking about, say, Trinity, it's very complex concept. Then you may want to be careful. No, maybe let's talk about it. Closed door, closed circle.
Okay.
Invited people. Yeah.
So can I, because in another op-ed in 2020, this was after the election, August, you said that in a dialogue, the conversation can take place only between equals. The conversationalists must never be condescending. There should never be a feeling of superiority. Don't you think by saying only some people deserve to be invited, selected, there is a feeling of superiority and condescension towards those who are excluded?
Okay. Okay. Then my quick answer to that, you need to be very thoughtful on who you want to invite, to the dialogue. Yeah. So, for example, dialogue on hijab, you find that there is a group of people from organizations or from the Asatizah fraternity or from, community, religious sector. I mean, and certainly we will not catch everybody. There are people who ought to be invited, but we're not invited. So I think that's one of those things. But
Okay.
yeah.
Right. So, okay. So let's move on to the final one. Thank you. So this is the longest episode we've had so far, and we only have 8 more minutes. So we have to be quick for the final one. So one of your suggestions at the IPS forum was that we should have an NMP from the religious sector. But in the earlier op-ed I referenced in 2017, when Faisal Manap raised the Tudung issue, right, in Parliament, and you were saying that we shouldn't do that, right, because to raise issues of religion in Parliament for the sake of winning political support is politicizing religion, and this is against secularism. So how does having an NMP from the religious sector not go against secularism?
Yeah. Now, I am against, elected members of parliament to take up religious issues or matters regarding religion in parliament, because in the first place they don't have the loci standi to do that. They are born from the womb of secular, from secular politics, and that's very clear. I'm very particular about being proper. Once you are elected, once the secular system produces you, the secular system register the point that there is a strict division between
Right.
religion and state, religion and politics.
Right.
So to me, because you are elected member of parliament through a political contest, you don't have that justification to take up
Then
matters
why
of religion.
why
And secondly, Walid, issues of religion should never be subject to a contestation. So, for example, Faisal brought up the issue of hijab.
Yeah.
However beautiful his arguments are, however good his arguments are, do you think the ruling party will say, yeah, we agree with you, wonderful, Mr. Faisal, you were superb, You think so? In a political contestation, that will never happen. Somehow,
but that's not how change happens, right? Change happens over a long time of. Yeah. But anyway, that's a separate matter, right? So I just wanted to go back. The GRC system, why have it if the minorities cannot champion minority issues? What's the need of the GRC?
Yeah, I think GRC is meant to serve the purpose to make sure that in Parliament there are Malay MPs, there are Indian
to do what? To do what? Assuming they are there not just to look Malay or look Indian. The purpose is to raise
to give value add, specific and unique perspectives to issues of the day.
Which presumably the Chinese cannot.
Which are national issues lah.
National issues. Yeah. I mean, any community issue is a national issue.
How I see a national issue may be different, from an Indian or a Chinese MP. So I thought that it is meant to enrich the debate in Parliament, and it's also meant to have diversity in the House. Yeah.
But the diversity must be diversity of viewpoints, right? There's no point looking different, but if everybody thinks the same or says the same.
In the same thing, you are elected by your constituents, by your voters, to represent you, and then you have to do that job lah. That is your primary, that is your most important.
Correct.
Job.
And the minorities have 2 constituencies, right? Their electoral constituency and the community.
Walid, if you remember 1990 AMP, where I came from,
yes,
I'm still consistent up to today. I say it cannot be done. That's why we propose a non-political community leadership.
Right. So basically, you are not in favor of the GRC, is it? You are not in favor of the GRC in terms of the
No.
MPs being required to represent the minority community.
No. GRC is there for multi-ethnic politics, in the context of electoral process, to be voted by your constituents, to be in the House, to represent them when we're discussing national issues lah. Yeah.
But I guess what's the point of having minority representation if they cannot bring up minority issues?
Minority issues, to me, you ask me, it is to be brought up by the non-political community leaders or the minority leaders and engage the state.
Then we don't need minority representation, right?
No, that is for a purpose that we want to have perspectives. I mean, I've said this a few times in Walid.
I know. I understand.
No,
okay, so I understand.
That's a national issue.
Maybe we reach an impasse. Maybe we reach an impasse. Maybe that's another point of disagreement. And also another point that I brought up in the paper, right, where minority MPs are required to serve 2 constituents, whereas Chinese MPs are not, and that's privilege.
Say again, sorry. What?
Minority MPs are required to serve 2 constituents. One is their ethnic constituent, the other is their ward constituents, geographical constituents, whereas Chinese MPs do not. That's Chinese privilege, right?
Yeah, but
Chinese MPs don't have to prove their Chineseness, right? But Malay and Indian MPs have to prove that they are Malays and Indians. That's
but you know that stuff, You know that stuff, and that's why Malay MPs are having two facades, One is the public, the House, and the other is the facade behind closed doors, right?
Exactly.
So
and Chinese MPs don't have that, right?
That's how they do it, huh?
Chinese MPs don't have that, right? Don't need to have that, right?
I'm not sure, but maybe.
And that's privilege, right?
Yeah, but Walid, you cannot just make sweeping statements, right? Because I'm not sure. The Chinese community itself has many issues also. The Daoists want to do street procession, The Daoists want big
The point is not that Chinese community does not have issues. Every community has the issues. The point is every Malay or Indian MP is supposed to represent Malays and Indians, but not every Chinese MP is required to represent the Chinese. Would you at least agree with that, or is that a sweeping statement also? We only have 2 more minutes, by the way.
Yeah.
I'll let you have the final word.
Yeah. Okay. I am clear in my mind that when it comes to issues of religion, culture, that has to be the purview of the non-political community leaders. Then you take up these issues to the state. I think it's more effective.
Okay, fair enough. I think probably there's some truth in what you said. Sorry, the time is up. Sorry, Ambassador, and thank you so much. This was the longest episode so far.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your candor and your willingness to engage.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And we'll take this offline. We'll have a closed door dialogue after this.
Yeah. Please, whatever it is, you have to be, whatever we say, you have to be based on knowledge and on facts,
Sure, definitely.
Evidence based. We cannot be emotional.
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador. Bye bye. Thank you, everyone.